Good evening, everyone. You're watching Vintage Motocross Q&A, and I'm your host, Joe Labate. Tonight's show is made possible with the help of Vmxq, Motion Pro, Preston Petty Products, Tiny's Towing, Full Circle Racing, Northwest Mako CZ, Racer X Magazine, the International Motocross Museum, and don't forget the York Swap Meet is coming up January 23rd at the York Fairgrounds. If you're watching the show and you want to share it, we would appreciate that very much. We'll give away a nice sticker sheet like this tomorrow on the show. Share it whether you're on YouTube or you are on Facebook. If you're on YouTube, comment Motion Pro, and somebody will win a nice sticker sheet like that tomorrow. My guest tonight has competed in 12 International Six-Day Trials event. He has taken a medal in 10 of them, and that's 6 gold, 3 silver, and a bronze. He's won numerous off-road events, both here and abroad, and he was named one of the top 10 off-road motorcycle racers of all time. He was also a part of a 6-day trophy team, 2 vase teams, and was a successful national motocrosser as well. It's my pleasure to have as my guest tonight, Mr. Jack Penton. Jack.
Hey, thank you, Joe. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. I guess we have to go back to the beginning, Jack, and let's go way, way back to the early days. You being from a motorcycle family, do you ever recall a time where there wasn't something going on with motorcycles in the Penton family?
Oh, not in my lifetime. Dad was a dealer well before I was born. So, no, I was born right into the whole motorcycle thing. And speaking of Dad, I was with him today. I mentioned that I was going to be on your show today, and he wanted me to say hi to everybody out there. He's doing really good, and he just wanted to let everybody know he's doing well.
Yeah, that was actually my next question, Jack. I know he's going to be, what, 97 years old?
He is 97, yes. And he kind of jokes. He says he's going to make it this far or that far. I said, oh, heck, Dad, you got to make it to the next election. How's that?
That sounds like a plan. I hope he does. Oh, boy. You know, your dad and his brothers, they started a motorcycle shop way back there during that time before you and I were born in Ohio. What was life like growing up for you there as a kid? What was that environment like?
You know, motorcycle shops back then, is I think we all kind of know, they were small affairs, you know, and they were family affairs. And looking back on it now, I hung around the shop when I was just a little bitty kid. I mean, on a tricycle, you know, and we were underfoot and we got shooed out of the shop all the time. But we had some fun. And I mean,
You've got a brother and a sister too. Are they younger than you or older than you?
well, I've got a bunch of them. I've got 2 brothers that are older, Tom and
Right.
Jeff, a sister that's older, Laura, and a sister, Barbara, and a younger brother, Tim.
So
So we
they
were,
were around there at that time?
uh, well, I'm in the middle, so they weren't around for the early shop.
Okay.
My 2 older brothers were, but in, that was back in I was born in '50s, so it was '50s, early '60s through mid '60s. Um,
Okay.
and he had a little. I mean, it was started out like any old motorcycle shop did. He went and he bought a couple of BSAs from the BSA dealer and or distributor. That made him a BM or a BSA dealer, and then he added a bunch of Japanese spikes like everybody did back then. And he finally settled on Suzuki and BMW, and let's see what else did he had NSU. Uh,
NSU.
yeah, he has some unusual bikes, you know, German bikes and some Japanese bikes, but started with BSA, added BMW and NSU, and grew from there. Honda became his primary Japanese bike when we got back up into the later '60s and '70s and
Right.
'80s.
So Jack, tell us about your first bike. What is your first experience on a little bike?
You know, my brothers, they got a bike for Christmas when I was too young. Well, they were a little bit older, so they got a little Yamaha 100 and they rode it around, and I rode that. And then they progressed to some other bikes. But by the time I got to be, I don't know, let's say 12, 10, whatever it was, uh, it was time we were started to experiment with the KTM products. And my
Ah,
first bike I ever actually raced was a KTM. It was a road bike. It was not a dirt bike as we know it, but that was the first bike that I actually raced. It was a very small 100cc KTM road bike.
what year was that, Jack?
That was 1967. That was 1 year before we actually began to make the bike and import the bike into the States.
Okay. You progressed pretty quickly. You became a state champ in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. What classes did you race there? Were you still on the 100? Did you move up? What happened?
Well, that was pretty simple days of motocross. State championship was one event, and you would just go to that event. And motocross was a uh, entertainment for us, I want to say, because we were off-road guys, and
Uh-huh.
although our equipment fit in real nicely in the late '60s, that's late '60s stuff with the old steel tank motorcycle, and then a little bit into the '70s. But I never did any serious um, motocross. I did one time in '70, the year that Moisev won. I got to ride Moisev's bike in some of the Trans Ams here in America, but I
Yeah,
was not of the caliber of the Bob Hannas of the day and the people of that time. Uh,
sure.
Again, we're off road riders. I never really compared myself to any of those people. Their sport was so different than the 6, 8, 10 hours we were riding a day. It's very, very different. So it would be a marathon runner running with sprint guys. It was
Sure.
short.
Sure. Jack, this show is going to appear on two cable channels as well out in Long Island, New York. And while many of my viewers here probably understand enduro and trials and certainly motocross, not everyone out in our television audience probably understands what an international 6 day trial is. So we're going to take a break for a commercial. We're going to hear from Motion Pro. And when we come back, I'd like you to explain a little bit more about what it takes to ride a motorcycle race for 6 days and the things that happen during that event. Okay.
Very good. Love to do that.
We'll be right back after this word from Motion Pro.
Hi, Jeff here, introducing you to Motion Pro's magnetic pickup tool today. Now, we've all had that bad experience where we drop a loose part or fastener into a hard to reach place like a skid plate or belly pan. Well, this is the right tool for the job that will retrieve that stubborn part and get you back to working on your ride. As for the features of the magnetic pickup tool, first you have this billet aluminum handle. There's a low profile magnetic tip that's extremely strong and in fact will even pick up a Motion Pro T handle. This flexible shaft can get into hard to reach places and with its protective coating won't damage the finish on your motorcycle. The magnetic pickup tool is affordably priced at $14.99 and is available from your favorite power sports dealer nationwide, so avoid future frustration and pick one up for yourself today.
All right, Motion Pro, thanks so much for being a sponsor of our show. As I mentioned before the break, Jack, I want to talk about what an international 6 day trial is. When does it begin? How much do you have to ride every day? What are some of the special things that you have to go through in order to compete in an event like that?
Well, the International 6 Days Trials dates way back to the 1920s, and it's a contest very similar to the Olympics that we're aware of, where it pits country against country.
Mm-hmm.
And the event itself originated that the country had to ride the bike manufactured in that country. So if you were from England, you would have to ride an English bike and so on. We as Americans didn't actually join the 6 days or even get involved in the 6 days until the late '40s. In 1949, I think it was, we traced back our first serious competitor we knew. But by the time we got to the '60s, when Dad got involved in the 6 days, we weren't running a team at that time. You went and rode just as an individual. Dad and a lot of the early people didn't qualify because they didn't have bikes of the country. But they take 6 riders from a country, and they become a team, and they ride separately, individually, and it's 6 days long. You ride approximately somewhere in the area 7, 8 hours a day, whatever that turns out to be, off road and with some sections to get back to the off road. It's somewhere around 120 miles, maybe something like that, and you do that consecutive 6 consecutive days. And you can imagine now that started in the 20s. So those guys riding those 1920s motorcycles and 30s and 40s, and even when we got there in the 60s, it was difficult just to keep a motorcycle going for 6
Mm.
But then there's a time schedule that you're required to stay on. You start in the morning and you follow a time schedule. And if you get behind that time schedule, then the scoring would be against you. You would gain points. But so if anything happened to your bike during any of those 6 days, a flat tire, a broken cable, whatever it may be, you ran a very distinct possibility of losing time. And this all added up. The scoring system was, if you stayed on this time schedule, you could then earn a gold medal. If you fell off of it a certain percentage, you would get a silver. And if you finished, but you were off the time schedule enough, you would get a bronze. And of course, then you could DNF. So the pressure was very, very hard to stay 6 days, have everything go just right, stay on this time schedule, and get a gold medal. So a gold medal was very, very valuable,
Sure.
hard to earn. And the most difficult thing was to have 6 riders that performed at a real high level and were able to achieve this. So
Mm.
winning the world trophy was an enormous challenge. You got to take your 6 guys. They have to be very fast. They have to be able to keep their bikes together. All of these things added up. And that was the challenge that my dad stepped into in 1962 when he went the first time. Was he first saw this competition. And I grew up from the very beginning knowing about it when he'd come home and tell us about it.
How many of those events did he actually compete in?
I would have to say, I'm going to guess at about probably about 6.
About 6.
But they were spread out. He went in 62, and then of course he had businesses and he had injury, everything that can happen to you in a period of time. But the last one that he went to was in 1970. And uniquely enough, my brother Tom, my brother Jeff, myself, and Dad all rode the 1970 event. And it's the only time that, that many people in a family ever rode that event at one time.
Sure.
So,
And Jack, you've ridden the international 6-day trials 12 times. Were you always on a Penton for each of those events?
no, interestingly enough, the Penton was from 1968 until 1978. And
Yeah.
I rode beyond when the Penton was here. So I rode a Penton at the beginning. I rode a KTM when the name went from Penton to KTM. I rode a Husqvarna one year, and I rode a Kawasaki. So I got to ride it on a number of different models.
Who were some of the guys that were on your teams also? You mentioned, of course, the members of your family, but the other years that you had raced, who else from America was on some of the teams that you were on?
Well,
Carl Crank?
yeah, I was very fortunate because I was spread out from 70 to 85, so I got to do a couple of half generations there. So our early teams were people like Dave Munganess, and in the older generation were riding Pentons, and then our generation, Dane Linebaugh, my cousin, and my brother Tom and Jeff, as I mentioned before. But our extended family were a lot of people like Billy Ewell, Carl Crank, Kevin Lavoie. There was a number of people that came along during the way. There were just so many people. The Penton had a big team, and we fielded a lot of people every year.
Yeah. Now, you also rode in Australia. Australia. You spent some time racing down there too, in Bathurst?
Yeah, we were the importer, the KTM importer in Australia was Bert Flood. And Bert invited us to come down, and he helped us to get there. It was myself and Kevin Lavoie. And we went and we rode 2 of their qualifying events for the 6 days. And it was still early on in Australia's beginning of their participation in the event. And they were developing some real good riders, some guys that, went on to be very high level, good quality 6-day guys. And we went over there and got to ride with them very early on. we were very successful. We were proud to be able to. Kevin and I split. He won one event, and I won the other event.
Now, when I was doing my research for this interview, a name that comes up every year in motorcycle racing, road racing in particular, is of course the Isle of Man. Very, very dangerous. Usually at some point of that race, it usually ends in tragedy. When I heard that you had raced the Isle of Man, we think of the road race course, but obviously with an international 6-day trials event, you're not on that. You probably do spend some time on that road course, but where else throughout the Isle of Man does that race take you?
Well, the Isle of Man is a very difficult terrain because it's filled with bogs, and being from Ohio, obviously we have no clue what a bog is. But we went over there, and it's just a spongy, very deep type of. It isn't even mud. It's just a spongy stuff. So we had to learn a whole different. And what isn't a sponge is a rock. So it's you'd be riding across the bog and hit a rock and do a big endo for no good reason. But it's very easy to get stuck. It's very easy to lose your way because it's very foggy. The Isle of Man is in the middle of the ocean, and it's foggy nearly every day. And the only way they had to mark the course was to put sticks in the ground with arrows on them, and sometimes you couldn't see 10 meters ahead. So staying on course, learning to ride something totally new. The weather was not comfortable. Of course it was dreary and cold usually, but it was just a heck of an adventure. And the first time I went there was very early in my career. I think I was probably I want to say 18, and new experience. Any of the 6 days experiences involved, worldwide or national or international travel, staying in hotels and eating food that you're completely not familiar with, riding on terrain you'd never seen before. We had a lot of disadvantages that we had to overcome that the Europeans were so much more familiar with. And so that always became part of the biggest battle, was overcoming those. And the Isle of Man had as many as any challenges that were really, really unique. They were even unique to the Europeans. If you're from Italy, the Isle of Man presented some real strange terrain for you also. But we adapted, we learned, we did well. The second time I went in 75, I was very fortunate to have things fit together, and I rode at what I consider a world-class level. I was able to be very close to winning my class, and I was in the top 10. I was sixth overall. So that was a good adventure.
What class was that, Jack?
That was the 250 class, which is the 250 class that had all of the trophy team riders. The two premier classes, like it is today, were 250 and the 350 and open classes. So it was real challenging. But actually, behind me is a picture of the Cycle News cover coming around on the Isle of Man, and there's a lighthouse there, and that's one of the very few pictures that I have on my wall that really represents a real fun time in my racing career.
Who was on your team there in Australia with you?
Boy, oh boy. Oh, you mean in the Isle of Man?
On the Isle of Man, I'm sorry.
Boy, now you're testing me. Carl Crank and myself and Tom. Oh, I don't know. You can't do that to me. That's 40 years ago or something.
Sorry. As much time as you spent there at the Isle of Man and in Australia, you had a pretty successful career in the desert too, out here in California, and you also raced in Canada. Tell me about some of those events.
Well, the only actually events that I participated in California, my brother rode the Baja event. That wasn't the highlight of his career, but I rode the qualifiers.
Okay.
And it's interesting that you would bring that up because we went to that brings up a whole interesting thing is the people from California, Larry Rossler and all of these, just top level riders came, and they had to learn to ride in the woods and back here east. And they did that. And they learned to ride in Europe. And we didn't here in the East necessarily have to go to California for anything. So we had no experience. But I went to the qualifier in the desert, and I happened to win it, which surprised them a lot. But they didn't run it out through the main desert. They ran it up in the rocky parts of the thing. So it was I could be competitive there. But yes, I have raced in California. I had some success in California, winning overall in qualifiers, but it was not a desert race. It was not, flat out across the desert like you would think.
What about Canada?
Well, Canada is interesting because they have a national enduro that they've had that rivals our jack pine. It goes back very, very far, and it's their one premier enduro of the year. And my dad started going there. We live in northern Ohio, which once you go around the lake Erie, we're only 30 miles from Canada across the lake.
Okay.
So we would go around the lake. He'd go around the lake and he'd go up to Corduroy, and he was winning that event up there, consistently. And then all of myself and all of both of my brothers at one time or another went up there and rode it. And all four of us have won that event up there. So the Corduroy is kind of a family affair for us. And it's a bit of pride that we did well up there.
Vmxq, who already has a full line of vintage parts, now has air shocks that are an exact duplicate of the original air shocks so popular in the late 70s. So whether you're looking to build a full racer or museum showpiece, these shocks will give you that incredible 70s look and improve your bike's performance. These new air shocks are fully rebuildable with Vmxq rebuild kits, and all shocks are hand assembled in the USA with all new components. Every component is brand new. Just like the originals, our air shocks are adjustable with 2 chambers, high and low pressure, giving you tremendous flexibility for settings of your bike suspension. The Vmxq air shocks come fully assembled and ready for installation. Just add air or nitrogen. The kits include the manual and spacers. Visit Vmxq.com to check out the air shocks and all that Vmxq has to offer to help you get back on track and to keep that ride going.
Jack, I want to go back for a moment and talk to you about what was it like as a youngster, but before the Penton motorcycle actually was imported here. What do you recall about? What did you observe from your dad? I mean, it just seems somebody's dad might say we're getting a new car or a new truck or we're going to get a vacation home, but your dad wants to build his own motorcycle.
Well,
you're into motorcycle racing. You have brothers that are. What is the tone around the shop? Are you talking about that? Or are you thinking that the old boy is losing it? What's going on there?
Well, from very early on, I mean, like I say, back when I was on my tricycle, my Uncle Ted and my Uncle Ike were very involved. They had a machine. Uncle Ted is a master machinist, and I say this right away because he doesn't get enough credit in a lot of instances. He was a driving force behind the Penton motorcycle later when we started to do development. He was the knowledgeable high-end machinist and technical guy. But when they got started, he was the guy that was helping my dad to modify all of these road bikes to do the jack pine and ride these events. So it was actually Uncle Ted hand making parts for these road bikes, the NSU, the BMW, these early motorcycles. That's what we saw. We saw him, taking these bikes apart, and Uncle Ted and Dad making these dirt bikes that Dad was riding, and then go off, and we would go. Like I mentioned, the Jack Pine Enduro. We had all of these kids. There's 7 of us. We're like the Brady bunch, and then there's Dad and Mom. There's 9 of us, right? And we have this Ford station wagon, and we all load in it, and we have a trailer with a bunch of junk on it, and the bikes and gas and all of that. I mean, we look like Summer Vacation or something, the movie, and we would go to Jack Pine. And then my mom would run around with all of us kids in the station wagon, and we would chase Dad around to the gas stop. So we were involved. I mean, we were seeing the competitions, and I got to add at this point, we would go up there and there'd be 600 people ride this. They'd start in downtown Lansing, and it's a big deal. And the governor would come and wave them off, and all this stuff would happen. And at the end, Dad'd go up and he'd win, and he'd get the big trophy. So, like for us, if you went to a race, you're supposed to beat everybody. I mean, we didn't know any better. We just didn't know any better. That's the way it was. So, later on when we started racing, we didn't care if we won our class. Did we beat everybody? That was kind of our mentality, because that's all we got to see, And Dad would hang around with the people that were competitive at that level. There was the other guys that were winning and beating him, and they were all, well, when you're a little kid, everybody's your aunt and uncle, So all of those people were, to this day, are still close if they're still alive, because we hung around with those people. We had a very interesting life.
When the Penton motorcycle first got to Amherst from Austria, what do you recall about those days? And was there a big interest in the bike? Were people flocking to your shop? Were you selling them quickly? What was it like? Because the rest of the time, I mean, you had your Husqvarnas and Makos, and you had your Yamahas and things like that. But what was it like to have that bike, and were people really flocking toward it, wanting to know more about it?
There wasn't actually anything relative to that. What happened was, when he got the first, they came in containers. We got 105 bikes in a ocean container. We opened the back door, we unloaded them, put them in our barn on the farm, and then Dad had to figure out how to sell these. There wasn't like this massive marketing program. Okay.
Oh.
We were a part of the United States dealer network. Dad was a Honda dealer and he was a Suzuki dealer. So he would go to dealer meetings, and he knew the dealers in a lot of dealers in the country. And he'd been racing, and a lot of the dealers raced. And so Dad knew the dealer network. He knew who he wanted to sell them to. Okay. But he didn't set up a dealer until he got the bikes, put the bikes in the van, and drove to the dealer he knew and set them up. Like people like Dave Munganess, Leroy Winters, Dick Betancourt, these are just some old dealers, and some people recognize those names. He would just go to their dealership, unload the bikes, and tell them, here's your bikes. You're now a Penton dealer. They weren't coming looking for us. They didn't know it existed. There was no pre-planning or pre-marketing. He just built the bikes on faith, knew they'd work, took them to the dealers. The dealers knew him. If he said, there's a Penton motorcycle, it's going to work. Well, when they looked at it, they knew they had something. Mm-hmm. And so it took no time at all for those motorcycles to get into the field, and then it developed a desire for them to get to the dealer. But the dealers are the ones that introduced the motorcycles to the new market that's out there.
Jack, let me ask you this. Do you recall how long it was between your dad going to Austria to KTM, describing the bike that he wanted to build, it being put to paper, and you getting a bike in that shipping container? 2 years, a year? 3 years?
It was so fast that by today's standards, nobody even believed it.
Really?
In '67, we saw this little road bike that I said I rode. We saw a KTM road bike came out of a dealer in Cleveland. From that point, Dad went in '67 to Austria, met Mr. Trunken-Paulson, and made a deal to make a prototype. In the meantime, they sent a race bike from their little factory team, and my brother Jeff and I, we rode it around, and we thought it was pretty cool. And then a prototype came in December of '67, and the first bikes, production motorcycles, were built, and 10 of them were airshipped in March of '68. Wow. So in way less than a year, all that happened. And that's something you would never even conceive of in like modern business. But that's why when they got here, well, the same 10 that they've air freighted here, 30 days later, they were here. They were in our barn. So what are you going to do with them? There was no time between even the prototype and the production bikes to do any marketing. Because there wasn't marketing like today. I mean, it didn't exist. You had some monthly magazines that came out that had 3-month, lead times on them.
Right.
And you couldn't introduce something like that in a magazine anyway. So it was all done, it was done, word of
How
mouth.
long was it? How long was it before you, Tommy, or Jeff actually took one out and raced it?
Okay, that good question, because they came in March. They came in early March, and in early March, there's 2 big events, off-road enduro events back east here. One of them is Stone Mountain Enduro in Georgia, North Georgia, and the Alligator Enduro during Daytona Speed Week.
Okay.
And so those bikes came at the beginning of the week, and they landed at Cleveland Airport, and they were being raced the next Sunday.
Wow.
So we had a factory Penton race team in less than a week. So this is how things happened back then. You just went and did them.
Now, let me ask you this, Jack. At the height of it, after you had how many dealers did you have out there? And at the height of it, how many Pentons were you selling?
Both of those things are questions that are a little bit hazy. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Dealers wise, we were able to help create a whole new group of dealer network because we were already a Husqvarna dealer, and Dad was setting dealers up for Husqvarna. And in order to become a Husqvarna or an early Penton dealer, it didn't take a lot. I mean, there weren't a lot of complications. Buy a half a dozen motorcycles, a few parts, and away you go. And
Right.
so we were developing dealers along with the ones that Dad knew. And we are probably the proudest thing that we have, or one of our prides, is that we began a lot of the dealers that had become very successful over the years. The first motorcycle brand they ever started with was a Penton motorcycle. Dad gave them an opportunity to start a dealership. And an example of that, and it came out a little different, was Rod Bush, who later became the president of KTM America and was instrumental in the KTM that we know today. His dad and him in their garage started a Penton dealership. And that's how he got involved in the dealer level of motorcycling. And so what better person to carry it on to help and guide Mr. Peer in the current thing. But everything from that to, some of the biggest dealers in Houston and so on started out just in their garage as a Penton dealer. So when you say numbers, I couldn't say, but I would have to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 400. And that's
And they were primarily east of the Mississippi?
No, we had a distributor. We set up our own distribution in Amarillo, Texas, and in Sacramento, California. And
Okay.
Dave DeWardy was in California. That's where Carl Crank worked out of. So we have distribution around the country. So we had a good distribution network in all 50 states.
Okay. I want to thank our sponsor, PrestonPettyProducts.com, for being a sponsor of Vintage Motocross Q&A for almost 2 years now. Be sure to visit them online. They have all sorts of specials every week, PrestonPettyProducts.com. How old were you when you became an official employee of Penton Imports, Jack?
Well, I think, like everybody else, I swept the floor and did everything else I needed to do. But when I graduated from high school, I actually went to work for the company. I had been riding and doing a lot of things, but, of course, obviously during my school years, it was part-time. But as soon as I got out of high school, then I was working full-time for Penton Imports and High Point Racing Products, which was that was our group of accessories and support products for not only the Penton motorcycle, but for all motorcycling. That helped us to become a much larger company and spread out and sell products for all of the different off-road brands out there.
What were some of the products that High Point was selling at that time, and where were they being imported from?
Well, Dad was very innovative. He was traveling all over Europe and the United States looking for things. And our very largest product, and the one was most well known, was the High Point boots made
Yeah.
by made by Alpine Stars in Italy. Alpine Stars today is still a leader in protective gear, but they started out as our boot company, manufacturing the High Point brand of boots here and selling Alpine Stars around the world to Europeans and all over. That was our one of our biggest products. High Point Racing Oil was manufactured by Intercontinental Lubricant, which is Spectral Oil today. And Dad
Oh,
went and got them in the oil business. He got KTM in the motorcycle business, and Alpine Stars in the motorcycle boot business, and Spectro in the in a number of companies like Twin Air, and but one that I'm proud of and is I want to spend a little time explaining was we struggle with rims. Rims on off-road bikes were steel, and those were very difficult to keep straight. And they wanted to go to aluminum, and we had Akron, some companies making different types of aluminum rims,
mhm.
but they were all inadequate. Also, they were very soft. And Dad went to a company in Indiana, which is close to us, that was building extruded aluminum wheels for wheelchairs, and they had to be, because they're so narrow, they had to be very, very strong. The tensile strength on these, that was a whole different type of rim with the extruded aluminum. And so he had them make a series of rims, High Point rims, that were extruded aluminum. And we wanted to put them on the KTM motorcycles, but it wasn't uh, financially feasible to ship them to Europe. So he took one of our High Point rims over to Akron, and that is where Akron got into the extruded aluminum wheel business. So that's one that's not very well known, but Dad and our company was forever introducing, the next level of product. And a lot of times it wasn't actually related back to us, but we got to take advantage of that technology.
You think you were making more money selling boots than you were selling bikes?
Oh, there's no doubt about that. Everybody could buy a pair of boots. Only so many people could buy a motorcycle.
Yeah. Hey, Jack, while I'm thinking about it, and I guess the question is a little out of chronological order, but from what I understood, all those years of racing that you did and the motocrossing and all that stuff, you never had a mechanic like some professional racers had. You always turned the wrenches yourself. Is that true?
Oh yeah. Anybody from my generation certainly understands that. Um, I was not the only one that was a quote unquote factory rider
Yeah.
that loaded the truck and managed themselves. And years later, I worked for KTM on their off road team, and it took 7 of us to do what we were expected to do alone. Uh, but that was fairly normal for most of the teams. It wasn't until some of the Japanese teams began to get involved in off-road that they started to have, a dedicated, somebody that would drive their vehicle and somebody that
Right.
would work on their bikes. But part of my life from the time I was 14, 15 years old up until the end of the Penton motorcycle, we did everything. As a matter of fact, Dane Linebaugh, another person that she should get a lot of praise in our company, my cousin Dane, and myself, and we spent a lot of time loading our vehicles. We were also the PR people in the field. We went to a motorcycle race. Um, we were customer service, we were PR, we were everything for the company. So we not only raced the motorcycles, we also took care of customers. We provided support where we could, whatever we could do. We were PR people from the time we left the shop until we got back home. We drove there. We did everything.
Jack, tell me this. Where did the High Point trailer idea come? Those things are pretty interesting, kind of collectible today. High Point trailer.
Well, Dad, like everything else, he anything that was good for motorcycling was good for business. He was interested in, and he had seen that design somewhere, and I can't exactly remember where that was. And he made a trip to, I believe, California. There was a company, a gentleman that was making those, and he had the molds for them. But he had 4 barrels in the yard, and he was welding frames, and it was not a full production type company. And Dad bought the molds from him and brought it back. And Uncle Ted again built a full manufacturing facility for making the frames, welding the frames and jigs, and casting the fiberglass parts, and building and assembling those trailers. And uh, Dad saw that was a design that just wasn't out there. They're aerodynamic. They're extremely light. It was almost like the motorcycle. It
Yeah.
was a new, innovative type of design that he believed in.
One of the most recognizable voices in motorsports, Larry Myers. Before he became a famed announcer, he actually had something to do with Penton Imports. Can you discuss that with us?
Larry's a very close friend today. I still have lunch with him, but I'll tell his story a little bit.
Sure.
Larry was from Lansing, Michigan. I mentioned before the Jack Pine was in Lansing, and
Yep.
Larry rode the Jack Pine, and he watched Dad and all win, and all of his heroes. He'd go downtown in his bicycle when he was young, and then he rode it later. But he went to college and became a salesman for Massey Ferguson. And
Okay.
on his route, he was in Ohio, and he stopped by at Dad's motorcycle store, knowing the history. He wanted to, see John Penton, and he stopped in, and he said hi, and that was about all. And they got to know each other a little bit. And then later on, when Dad started to import the motorcycle, and the company got big enough that he needed somebody to manage the company so that he could do what he needed to do. He and Larry got back together, and Larry became the president of Penton Imports, and was responsible for managing the Penton Imports and High Point. And Larry's other love was he loved the Michigan Mafia, the flat track guys up there, Bart
Yep.
Marks and the whole gang, Keener, all those guys. He lived right in the middle of that hubbub, and so he was very instrumental in us being able to sell into that market with, like, Kenny Roberts and all those guys wore High Point boots, and
Yeah.
that was Larry's influence, and Bob Hanna. He loved the sports. He loved to do those promotions, and he was very instrumental in the High Point boots, and a lot of the other High Point products that he could place on these athletes out there that were not Penton riders but were very prominent. So Larry was doing that, and I'm going to take a little license here and say that he went to a race, and he was asked if he would announce. I think this has to do with Dave Coombs. Okay.
Okay.
And he began announcing, and he began his career. Oh, this is a folklore, so I'm not gonna swear by it, but I understand that if they named High Point Raceway the pro motocross track, that's Dave Coombs's High Point, that he do the announcing or something like that. So all of this fits together one way or another. But as the Penton motorcycle went away, and as we began to wind down High Point, he then became a professional in broadcasting and announcing, and that's how he got his start.
Yeah. Jack, I want to ask you this. I want to get back to the manufacturing of the Penton. And you started in 68, 69. Of course, by 74, 75, some changes are coming in motocross. Suspension is changing, frames, geometries. Who's giving KTM the specs to build a Penton like the MC5? Or are they telling you this is what we're doing, this is the bike you're getting? How's that work?
Well, there's a couple of things there. This is very important for me to explain, is
Yeah.
that when Dad went over to Austria and he met the KTM people in their R&D shop, they did not make a dirt bike. They only made scooters, small displacement motorcycles, and they were a very popular bicycle. I would compare it to Schwinn. Locally, everybody knew them. They made a good product. but they were not making racing bikes. They did in their R&D department have guys that raced at a high level. There was actually people that raced the 6 days and local motocross in their R&D, but they didn't make so they handmade those motorcycles, and they were KTMs. They were hand making those only one-off bikes and going to the 6 days. Okay. And so when Dad said he would help to sell and help to finance the beginning of the first dirt bike, they made a Penton dirt bike. Okay. But in Europe, it was a KTM dirt bike. And those dirt bikes were being sold by some very prominent racers, just like Dad. Arnaldo Ferrioli was a world-class 6-day rider, and he became the Italian distributor. And Tony Stuckelmeyer was the German national enduro champion, and he became the KTM distributor in Germany, and so on. So it wasn't just the Penton family in the United States. The input for KTM from the very beginning was technically worldwide, but it was a high level of distributors and their high level riders that were all inputting. So they had input from virtually everywhere. The biggest influence, obviously, were the ones selling the most bikes, which was Italy, Germany, the European countries, and America. But so we were all contributing. But the United States, our primary market for Penton motorcycles was off-road. When they first came out, you could ride anything that was dirt worthy in motocross. Our steel tank motorcycles were 100s and 125s that were small displacement, dirt capable competition motorcycles. So motocross worked fine. When we got to the 70s, we began to see a division between specific motocross bikes and off-road bikes. But a vast majority of our motorcycles, the Penton motorcycles, probably sold somewhere way over 80% of our motorcycles were either off-road casual, off-road competition motorcycles. Okay. And so when motocross got real big and the Elsinore came along, it only affected 10 to 15% of our market. It didn't really affect our market. So that was not like, our movie depicts that as sort of a downfall, but in a business sense, the product line was not holding us back because we were selling, and that production, that development was from America and these other people. But in Europe, they started racing World Championship Grand Prix motocross, and the input for the motocross part of the product line was coming from Europe, not from us. So there's quite a division there of market. Well, in Europe, you can't ride a motorcycle off-road. There is nowhere to do that. Even back in the 70s, they didn't have a market for off-road motorcycles. In America, you could leave your garage. Most people that owned them, they didn't even have to put them in a trailer or a truck to go somewhere. They just rode them. So that was our market. That was the big part of our market. And in Europe, the only place they could ride them was on motocross tracks and organized enduros. And an organized enduro in Europe was more complicated to get involved in. So we had one market, they had a completely different market, and the development came along with our market and their market. And honestly, that has never changed. KTM today still has the broadest range of competition off-road or off-road motorcycles of any brand in the world. It never changed. And those markets never really changed either. We can still go out to the desert and go riding. You can buy a motorcycle today and this afternoon go ride it without having to buy a license, without having to go and, enter some club. You just go ride it. You just simply can't do that in Europe. So understanding the difference in markets and what the evolution of the motorcycle, it all fit together very beautifully, actually. Well, and that's why here in America, we did support a couple of pro motocrossers, but that was not our primary market. So we spent very little money on that promotion, where we spent all of our money on things like national events and 6 days off-road competition.
Yeah. Now, there's an old expression in the motorcycle, and I guess the car business too: win on Sunday, sell on Monday. What did Gennady Moiseyev's World Championship in '75 do for sales?
Uh, Virtually, I don't want to say nothing, but very, very little for our market. It
Yeah,
was we were distant bystanders, to be honest with you, because World Championship motocross to us didn't sell a bike. It didn't just sell one bike, So winning it or not winning it, the idea is that your name was out there. Your name was amongst the leading motorcycles. That was the advantage. We might have sold. When Dungey won, how many more motocross bikes did they sell? Well, I'll tell you, they probably sold a whole lot more, but they
sure.
sold a heck of a lot more off-road bikes, because now the off-road guys could puff up their chest and say, yeah, we're as good. They didn't get you show up at a motocross in 1983 on a white KTM, you might as well show up at a racetrack for cars with a Saab. You know what I mean? It was not associated with that. It was not competitive with that in certain levels. So when they came to the more modern and they finally stepped over the line and they became competitive with product and with riders, that is part of the evolution of KTM. Today is the largest selling off-road competition motorcycle in America, including all the Japanese bikes. Well, that was where they were able to step over the line. And the other thing that contributed was Mike Rosso. I'm trying to give credit where credit is due, because I was there. Mike Rosso, an employee at KTM, and Rod Bush, we all realized that we were never going to retrain the markets out there for motocross, no matter how good the bikes are. We needed to build our own market. And the Japanese had been selling mini bikes, and that's when we became involved. KTM, I say we, KTM became involved in mini bikes, is that Mr. Peer, who had bought the company, said, we cannot manufacture them. It's not financially feasible to manufacture them, but you have our blessing to go to Italy, develop the motorcycle, and sell it in, again, American market. We have a large, small youth market, and not just for racing, but the kid could go in the backyard. Can't do that in Europe. So again, America leads that market, goes to Italy. We get a branded KTM, bring it to America. Selvaraj Narayana, I think you know who Sel is. Sel has been around the industry. He's working for us, and he helped to develop the Junior Supercross Challenge.
Yeah.
And so with our mini bike and the Junior Supercross Challenge, we developed our own motocross market. There was a KTM motocross kids, and there they are, Osborne and all the kids that went through there, Dungey included.
Yeah.
KTM was now cool. It was cool. So we were working at this whole marketing here in America. This is generation 2, Mr. Peer, Stefan Peer, and the American people, Rod Bush in our group. And we developed all of that for the basis. And the culmination was we got to use some of those riders as top pros. We not only developed them as kids and used them as, back then, but they then became the pro riders we know today. So,
I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say that's kind of an untold story, because where did KTM go from not being in motocross at all to being where they are today? Was a very step-by-step procedure that happened over a lot of years.
I think another story that is kind of untold, and people will often just say, well, KTM bought out Penton. What was the culmination of that, Jack? How did things slow down with Penton to the point of KTM saying, we're going to buy the company? Did you have to give up rights to that? Did you give up the name? How did that all transpire?
It was pure evolution, and the evolution was actually the world economics. The American market was a very good market, but in order to import into America is expensive.
Hmm.
Europe to America, the exchange, this is before the EU, and we're dealing with, like in Austria, shillings, and we're dealing with, US dollars and shillings. And what happened was when we started buying Penton motorcycles, we were buying Penton motorcycles we were able to buy, um, let's see, shilling, it was, you could buy so many shillings. And in 10 years later, those shillings, we had to pay twice as much US dollars for them. Our economy had devaluated enough that there was no profitability. The money was going to exchange rate. And so we were actually losing money selling the bike, and we liked the bike, but the boots and all of the other products where you're buying in smaller, quantities, and you can make your profitability correct.
Yeah.
See, we weren't dealing with the Japanese. The dollar didn't devaluate to the Japanese yen the way it did to the European money. So the motorcycles become way too expensive, but they weren't in the boot business, so you could set your price. So we were doing fine. We were subsidizing the motorcycle with the High Point, and we just simply came to a point where the product needed to move on to motocross. It needed to have more promotion in that area. Um, the people, we as a company weren't making any money on it. It just made way more sense for
Yeah.
KTM to import them, take that distributor's profit, and now become more competitive price wise, and do it themselves. And so we helped. We not only helped, we actually made that happen.
Oh,
Some of our employees, and Dad got a building, and he took some of our employees that could manage that, and they started a company and they moved over there, and he helped them in the transition from, our distribution of Penton Imports to KTM America. And that's where Rod Bush and some of those employees that went on to, and myself later on, we all went on to be part of the KTM America, the newer company.
yeah. I read something about you becoming part of a dealer service network or a property development person, even a competition manager with KTM after the buyout.
Right. But in between, and you asked me what bikes I rode at the 6 days, in between the end of the KTM and the beginning of the new KTM, the company KTM went bankrupt. And so, well, technically none of us worked there well, there was a little interim there, and I left at that time. And that just happened to be a time that I was looking for what to do next. And I sent out not really resumes, but business proposals to all the four Japanese, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki. Well, some of them had already begun programs to develop off-road motorcycles. My expertise was developing off-road motorcycles and managing race teams. That's what my expertise had been. And so Yamaha had already stepped into that a little bit and was looking at it. Kawasaki was looking at doing things, and they'd done some things with like Lars Larson early on, and
Yeah.
so on. Everybody was feeling around, but they weren't really coordinated yet. So I sent out a proposal to actually make a whole program, a team, a development team, and competition team. And I went and I rode a Honda. They were very intent on keeping the 4-stroke alive and doing the 650. None of my expertise area. Yamaha was right on the edge of getting theirs together, so I didn't really get anything there. So I went to Husqvarna and I said, I'm without a ride. I want to do something. And I rode a Husqvarna in Germany in the fall of '79. And that is the time I had sent out these proposals. I get home, and 2 weeks later, Kawasaki calls me, and the president of Kawasaki calls me, and he says, "Hey, why don't you come out here? Let's talk." And so I went out, and I talked to him, and I said, I'm looking kind of at the big picture. I'm not real interested in just racing. And he says, you know what? I think that we can maybe work something out here, because we're starting Team Green for the motocross side, and you could do the same for our off-road side. We want to take our off-road motorcycles and upgrade them so that they're better selling, and we want to introduce a promotional team, or a racing team. And
Right.
so I actually signed a contract with them, not the racing team. Actually, I signed a contract with the marketing team to develop a marketing team that not only did the R&D, but also built a racing team and did the PR or promotion stuff for the off-road. And I ran that here in my hometown here. And I went and I got Dane Linebaugh, who is the perfect R&D guy. Him and I and my brothers and all of us had been doing this job for 10 years. We did the Penton motorcycle. So we took our R&D building, our machine shop, our knowledge, our technical expertise, and we went. I bought the trucks. Had them all painted green, and I hired a team of riders, and we redid it here in green, right here in my hometown. And in '79, we signed a contract. '80 and '81, we ran the team, and we handed them the KDX 200. We built that back here. We spec'd out, we had the resources because we could spec out the fuel tank. We knew how much horsepower we had. We knew how much gas we needed to ride an enduro, and so on and so on. And Dane would carve out a gas tank that felt good and held that amount of tank out of foam. And we took it to Cleveland and had it rotational molded. We actually built the motorcycle, a lot of it, right here. And
Wow.
what we did was we would go to Kawasaki marketing department and tell them, we need this specification of gears. We need this transmission ratio. And they would go down to their R&D department and say, hey, get these from Japan. And they just send them to us. So it was a blend back to the KTM thing. But the big difference in this was that the specifications that they were looking for is they wanted to be able to sell a motorcycle from technically a woman or beginner, not beginner, but a intermediate rider up to the Jeff Fredette pro guy. Okay. But it wasn't going to be Penton level. It didn't have to be cutting edge. So we were able to build the perfect motorcycle for that, because we could step one step down from where we were building the Penton motorcycle and comfortably built what they wanted. So after 2 years, we built the bike, we sent it to them. And I'm very, very proud of Dane and my brother and all the team that put it together. It was the largest selling off-road motorcycle single model that they've ever had. The 200 was. And it was a real successful program, but that was the second generation. And then I went back to KTM, and we were able to, the same people that were working at Penton before were able to take KTM to the next level. So I've been extremely fortunate in my life to be working with and around some extremely talented people and see some real neat things happen.
Certainly have. I want to thank our sponsor, Tom McAllister and Full Circle Racing, for your on-road, off-road, enduro bike, whatever you might have. Get a hold of Tom McAllister at Full Circle Racing. Jack, did you hold a position with Malcolm Smith Racing as well?
I did. I've been able to do a lot of fun stuff with a lot of real interesting people. When High Point Racing Products, this got to step back. We ended the Penton motorcycle, and that went on to become KTM. And it got time where Dad wanted to retire, and Larry Myers had gone off to pursue other career, and the High Point Racing products were still very valuable. The boots were valuable, and we made a deal to sell the High Point Racing product name and what product we had left to Malcolm Smith. And Malcolm had been a friend for a long, long time. And so we did that. And Malcolm invited me to come out and offered me a job. And I moved myself and my family. I had 2 young boys at the time and my wife, Gigi. And we moved to California to work there in the Lemon Grove in the warehouse. and for 1 year. And we didn't really want to raise our children out there. So he offered me a job as a sales representative here in Ohio. It was a great opportunity to come back, stay in the industry, and work for Malcolm. So that's another thing I'll point out is behind me is one of my other very, very favorite pictures. It's a picture of Malcolm Smith and Dave Munganess and myself getting prepared in the morning before one of the 6 days. And these are people I respect, most respect for, and I was very fortunate to be able to be part of their lives and likewise.
In 1999, you were inducted into the AMA Hall of Fame. Are your dad and brothers in the AMA Hall of Fame too?
My father was the first to go in, yes, in the inaugural year. He went in, and then my brother Tom and myself went in the year after that. So yes, it's quite an honor. It was quite a different scenario. They were just beginning the Hall of Fame, and they had quite a large list. And in order to begin it, they made a very large first class and a pared down, but still a large second class. And was very, very honored to be part of the beginning of the AMA Hall of Fame. And if I might add, I'm proud to say that I was able to be part of the AMA's Hall of Fame in a lot of different areas. One was that I was on the selection committees for the off-road because I happened to bridge the gap between the old Jack Pine riders of the 50s and 60s and the modern people, and pretty knowledgeable or very knowledgeable of the whole off-road part of motorcycling. And so I was part of that. And then I was invited to be part of the board of directors. And at one point I was the chairman of the board of directors for the Hall of Fame. And that was quite an honor also.
Yeah. In 2010, you became the director of the AMA of operations. And I know you've been very, very active in that. What would you say are some of the top issues facing off-road riding today? Sometimes land is taken away from us. There's noise problems. But as a person who has been involved with the AMA, and I know they fight for a lot of our rights to ride, what is the biggest problem that you think we're facing today?
Well, I think it's pretty well known. They've done a wonderful job of making us aware of what those are, and you hit on those. We will never overcome being I don't know what we would describe ourselves, but to a lot of the general population of the United States, we are different. We use the lands like horse riders and bicyclists and a lot of other people. We believe we should be using our lands, and but we understand our responsibilities to that. But there's a lot of people that don't even believe we should be using them that in any way. I mean, they may go to a federal land and look at a monument or something, and just by treading on it, they're doing as much damage as we are because we're so limited. But that's a battle that will never go away, and sound will never go away. Pollution will never go away as far as things that offend other people in society, and that's not just us. That's everybody. So we're always going to have that. We're going to. I hope for the best, but like everything else, we see it. We see that they're going to build homes. We're going to have more population. The problem's going to bother more people. We have to be responsible. That's one thing that we have to do. We have to do the right things. Electric motorcycles may extend our ability to have an industry because youth are not going to be able to do what you and I could jump on an old stinky 2-stroke mini bike and go throw dirt around and spray oil all over and just have a great old time, make a lot of noise. But an electric motorcycle, they can go in their backyard, no matter how small it is, and do a circle. So without youth, we will never keep going. So we need to find ways to appease the people that don't want the sound and don't want the pollution and so on.
Have you yourself gone to Washington, Jack? Have you ever
I
been
have
to
no. That was not a part of the department that my interest in the AMA was kind of history connected. That it's to preserve the history and the future, and I was my interests were on the history side.
Okay.
So, but no, I have not. That I have heard a number of horror stories, obviously, about how difficult and expensive it is to even deal with what they have to deal with. So,
I want to thank a new sponsor. He's a good one, Jack. You know what this business needs, or my business, or all dirt bike guys need? They need transportation. Tiny's Transportation. He's moving bikes east of the Mississippi, up and down the eastern seaboard, from Florida to New Hampshire. Get a hold of Ron Eunice at 862-703-8500, 862-703-8500. Are there any other Penton members in your family that still ride?
Yeah, no, not really. Not really. My wife and I get to go out and ride our motorcycles every once in a while, but other than that, my brother Jeff, I coerced him into riding a ride. Oh, my brother Tom. I can't say that. My brother Tom, he does some riding. He goes to an event once in a while and hangs out and does some riding, but not a lot.
Ryan.
Huh?
Ryan.
Oh yeah, I have a couple of sons that can ride, but they've got children and that are growing up. So and my grandchildren ride motorcycles when they get a chance. So my wife had to remind me that, we get to go riding with our kids occasionally. So
Right. You mentioned electric bikes a moment ago, Jack. Do you think that's the future? Is the future here? Is it going to help us?
you know what? I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm just a spectator on all of that. That's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. What about Supercross? Do you watch Supercross? Do you think it has gone too far with the obstacles?
You know what? My wife and I go to outdoor motocross, pro motocross. We go to Supercross. We love the competition today.
We do too.
I don't want to judge what they have to do. They are so far more professional than anything that we had when we were back in our day. The training, the everything about it. I love the spectacle. I absolutely love the spectacle. I feel sorry for, the challenges they have to go through physically in order
Right.
to, earn their money and perform their sport. I hate to see them get hurt, but doggone it, they are fun to watch.
It sure is. Well, Jack, we're just about out of time for today, but I wanted to open up the mic to you in the event you wanted to thank some people or bring us to attention of something that you might have going on, any kind of projects, anything like that. So feel free to speak about whatever you might have, Jack.
Well, I'd like to give a shout out to Chris Carter from Motion Pro.
Oh yeah.
One of the best gentlemen in all of our motorcycle industry, for the support that he gives it to every facet of the sport. Preston Petty, a dear friend, and the people that now are running Preston Petty. You've got some wonderful, wonderful people there. Your sponsors. Is that FMF I see behind there or something?
No, that's a Northwest Mako CZ logo. It look like an FMF
It does
logo.
look like an FMF from there. But anyways, anybody that supports our sport,
Sure.
and especially our competition sports, so that we get to enjoy them. I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed being on the show. I hope I can come on again. There's so many different things you and I can go off on, all kinds of crazy stuff. But
Yeah.
It's always fun.
Jack, I want to thank you for joining me today. My guest has been Jack Penton. Don't go away. We're going to be back after this commercial break, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what's going on at Vintage Motocross Q&A. Okay, that wraps up our interview with Jack Penton for this week on Vintage Motocross Q&A. I want to thank you for joining us. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors, Vmxq, Motion Pro, Penton Petty Products, Tiny's Transportation, Full Circle Racing, Northwest Mako CZ, Racer X Magazine, the International Motocross Museum, and the York Swap Meet. That's coming up January 23rd. Stay tuned for Vintage Motocross Q&A. We will have an announcement tomorrow who won the beautiful sticker sheet, compliments of Vmxq.com. I'm also working on some interviews with Martina Falta, as well as Barry Weiss, and some other people as well. I want to thank you for tuning in for Vintage Motocross Q&A. Gino, come here, Jeans. Oh, you brought a toy with you this time? Oh, you're getting pretty fancy. Okay, Joe Lottie, we'll see you next time on Vintage Motocross Q&A.